I've been writing poetry lately. And what I'm going to do is the odd thing is that the poetry I've been writing is really not any kind of fantastical poetry at all. It's just straight up poetry. And a couple of the things have been accepted for publication, which pleases me. And so, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to read 4 short poems that I will give to you as perhaps genre inflected. And then I'm going to read 2 short, very short fiction pieces that are definitely, I think, genre material, and you can judge for yourself. The first thing I'm going to read, you all know that Vermont got really hammered in Tropical Storm Irene, and one of the most hit towns was the town of Waterbury, which is just north of where my wife and I live, and it is also the site, was the site of the Maine State Mental Hospital, which got pretty much trashed, and they had to move everybody out. And a year after the storm, the town had a big comeback 4th of July celebration that sort of went right up to and onto the property of the abandoned mental hospital. Well, I couldn't very well let that go. So this is called Waterbury, Vermont, June 30th, 2012. Beside the ruined asylum, the children ride their ponies. After the flood that wrecked the hospital and the town, the patients were dispersed, the building abandoned. The ponies move in a steady circle, supporting their happy riders, move in the firmest of arts like the hands on the face of a clock in the ruined asylum. The parents stand easy outside the circle and confidently watch their children safely astride these confident ponies. The bars are still on the hospital windows. A Ferris wheel spins in the distance. Nobody here at the fair knows what became of the patients. The next one is about an everyday thing, and this won't make any sense to you if you don't watch a certain TV show. It's called Friday Night. After paying for the Chinese takeout, I leave it in the car and walk over to the convenience store to buy a paper and 2 lottery tickets. The rain has stopped. Scarcely any puddles on the sidewalk by the bridge. Still water in the creek beneath. In the store, the young woman ahead of me wears red fake velvet boots. Her face betrays no expectations. At the register, I play my birthday. Walking back, I remember vampires can't cross running water. As I get in the car, I have to expect someone to run up screaming like Sookie Stackhouse. Bill is in trouble, and she has to find him. Which is for all the True Blood fans out there. Monica, I'm reading poetry, so I'll understand if you have to duck off, if you just can't take it.
I'm going to read poetry at the open mic later, so you can all go laugh at it. Sorry, I'm late.
And that's all right. The next one, I told you they were short. The next one stems from the trip that Jeannie and I took to San Francisco in May. And San Francisco is a city that has an historical plaque commemorating a murder in a hard-boiled detective novel, the Maltese Falcon. And this is called In the Empress of China Restaurant. 6 stories above Chinatown, you want fedoras and trench coats and the fog rolling in. The waiters are better dressed than the customers. In 2 different corners, 2 different people eat alone. They look perfectly content. You like the way the woman studies the menu. You're grateful the man took off his ball cap. You want them both to have stories of betrayal and loss. Nothing subtle, straight up jealousy and greed. Out the window, the buildings pile on the hills. You can see Coit Tower where you just were, and Alcatraz across the bay. The sun goes down. The lights come up across the hills, across this city. No fog. You decide that's okay. The waiter lights a candle on your table. The soup is amazing. Most of all, you want to know the story of the man down there you can't see. He's just locked the gate on his store. He heads home, ignoring the tourists, wondering what he's going to tell his wife. And the final one is just for something that, based on something I saw when I was driving home from work one day. It is also my first attempt at ever writing a sonnet. And except I bailed, and there's no rhyme scheme. I think the technical term for that. We had people coming in for a position at my university in creative writing, and they were reading, well, here's the sonnet. And I'm like, well, is it 14 lines? No. Does it rhyme? No. Why is this a sonnet? Well, it's got a turn. So this is 14 lines. It is iambic pentameter. It does have a turn, but it doesn't rhyme. Just so deal with it. It's called Early Spring. The king and queen are on sabbatical. The dragons still asleep. The snow is gone, but neither green nor any other color has yet emerged. The yard is flat and empty. Plenty of room for the child to turn around, faster and faster still, so that her blue cape swirls out, lifts, and moves with her above the slowly thawing ground. Just down the road, a neighbor girl plays catch with her father, both in shorts, despite the chill. A slightly older girl carries a rake down their front steps. The sky begins to clear as they assume their ordinary tasks, their capes and crowns, their bright and swirling things. And now, one of the things that I've enjoyed about working with the poetry is that I feel profoundly naive, because all my background is in fiction. I really have no idea what I'm doing. But for these two pieces, I am supposed to know what I'm doing, so I'll understand if your judgment is more harsh on these. This is a short piece called Road Dead. It is not only very short, but it's all one paragraph. And that is thanks to the fine Stephen Graham Jones, who had a similarly presented story in the Creatures anthology that Paul and John Lanyon co-edited, and that reprinted one of my stories. So I said, that's neat, I'll try that. And so this one is called Road Dead, and after the story, I'll tell you the two different things that came together to make me want to write this. Okay. All right, Road Dead. There was no cell service in our town. The nearest tower was in the next county. The closest place we could get a signal was the cemetery north of town. Danny needed to make a call, and the rest of us didn't have anything better to do. Jake drove, and Danny called shotgun. Rob and I were in the back. Before the turn to the cemetery, there was a turn onto a dead road, and at the turn, there was a sign that said, "Private road, dead end." It had been there ever since I could remember, but there were smudges over the private and the end, like someone had tried to erase them, and if you just looked quick, it looked like the sign said, "Road dead." "Well, hell," Jake said, and turned onto the road. "What the fuck, I gotta make my call," Danny said. "Sorry, man, gotta check this out," Jake said. "Goddamn, I gotta make this call, make it quick," Danny said. "Good luck with that," Rob said. I didn't say anything. I couldn't remember the last time I'd been on this road. Jake kept driving. It hadn't rained in forever, and the car kicked up a lot of dust. The sky was overcast, though, and you couldn't see the sun. There were plenty of clouds. It just wouldn't rain. We got to the end of the road, and there was a log cabin. "That prefab shit," Rob said. "No, this one looks old," I said. And it did. The wood was so worn down it was almost shiny, and there were patches on it where it looked like someone had tried to chop the house down. Jake pulled over on the far side of the road from the house and cut the motor. He rolled his window down, and we could hear music coming from the house. Classical music, like the teacher played in humanities unit. It sounded familiar. Before I knew it, I said, "Fuck." Danny turned around and looked at me. "La-di-da, Professor," he said. Rob snorted like it was funny. Then Danny said to Jake, "Now what?" "Don't know," Jake said. "Make up your fucking mind. I still got to make my call," Danny said. Jake looked at Danny and said, "Well, fuck, all right then." Jake got out of the car and started walking towards the house. Dumb shit always gotta be chasing something, Danny said. Then he started checking his phone. God damn this sorry remote-ass place, he said. Rob snorted again. Fucking buck, he said. Jake walked up at an angle to the front door and moved toward the side of the house. He put his elbows out to the side and got up on tiptoe and made a big deal out of creeping up to the house like he was one of the Three Stooges. When he got up to the side of the house, he made another big deal of peering into what I guess was a window, and then he kind of shook and went forward like he had tripped, and then he wasn't there anymore. You couldn't tell if he had tripped and fallen in through the window or if he'd been pulled inside. Fuck, Rob said. Danny was still fooling with his phone. What happened? He said. God damn it, I said, and then I got out of the car and walked across the road over to where Jake had been. There was a window all right, but it was closed. I looked inside. They didn't have any lights on it. It was hard to see much, but there were a bunch of people. More than you would have thought would have been inside such a small place. Some were men and some were women, and they all wore regular clothes. I didn't see Jake. One of the men was lying on some sort of table. He was strapped down to the table, and it didn't look like he had any clothes on. He was shaking, not like he was cold, but like he was riding down a rough road. A couple of times he seemed about ready to jump off the table, but the straps held him down. Some of the people were holding things, but I couldn't tell what they were. You could hear the music like the window was open. There was another window on the other side of the room that looked like it was covered in plastic until you realized the whole wall was covered in plastic, and the plastic had dark stains all over it. I looked again at the man on the table, and for a second I thought I knew him, but then the one standing closest to him looked up. It was a woman. I don't know if she saw me or not, but she stared like she was looking at something. I backed away from the window and into someone standing right behind me. I yelled and spun around. It was Danny. He and Rob had gotten out of the car and followed me over to the window. Fuck, 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 I said and ran for the car. Danny beat me there and got in and started it up. Rob and I piled in and we took off. We hauled down the road and turned and headed back up the main road toward the cemetery. What about Jake? Rob said. I don't know, I said. Danny didn't say a word, but when we got up to the cemetery, he pulled in and started driving up the path. Fuck you doing? Rob said. Danny kept on as fast as he had been going on the main road. A loose rock flew up off the dirt and cracked the windshield. When we got to the very back, past all the tombstones, he stopped the car. Fuck you doing? Rob said. Rob's right. What about Jake? We gotta go back, I said. You look through that fucking window. Fuck Jake. It's his own goddamn fault, Danny said. Then what are we doing here? Why don't we go? I said. Danny looked at his phone, and then he looked at us. I've got a signal, he said, and got out of the car. It was Jake's fucking idea, he said, and walked away. Rob and I stayed in the car. I turned around and looked back at the main road. The tombstones ran down to the road in neat rows. One near the car had fallen over. Danny was standing by it, talking into his phone low, like he was trying to keep a secret, but I could hear it. Hello? He said. Hello? I looked at Rob. Now what? I said. But now he was looking back at the main road, so I turned back around. A car was pulling into the cemetery with another right behind it. About halfway up the path, the first car stopped, and then the second. The first car turned its lights on bright, and the driver got out, and then the rest of them. And Jake. Jake got out of the second car and started moving towards Danny, but Danny didn't notice. He was still talking into his phone, but now he was shouting, hello? He kept saying, hello? Hello? We can't get cell reception at our house. The nearest spot where you can get a signal is the cemetery. That's about and while driving through Maine several months ago, I did see that road dead sign. So eventually I'll figure this out.
Okay. So big people get cell reception?
Well, I did. Anyway. Okay, the final piece is, well, I won't say anything about it. It's again, short. Not quite as short as that. It's called See That My Grave Is Kept Clean. Extra points for anybody who can tell me where that comes from. I never understood what the fuss was about. It was just a job, and everyone needs a job. I needed a job. I had already decided that Billy was the one, but until we were married, I was going to have to take care of myself. Not that Ma and Pa didn't take care of me, but you know what I mean. A girl always needs some money in her purse. You don't want to get caught unprepared. And it's not like I had a lot of options. I could type, but I wasn't very fast, and I was really good at filing, but the offices weren't hiring for that right then. Waitressing was out of the question. I didn't want to serve anybody. I did think being a car hop in Renzo's drive-in might be fun, but then my cousin Teresa got a job there, and it turned out the place was a front for something else they needed girls for, and Uncle Mike went over Teresa's first night and hauled her back home, so that was out. But then I heard Marbury Funeral Home was looking for someone, and when I found out all they wanted was someone to sit with the bodies when nobody else was there, I went right over, and they hired me right on the spot. In fact, they seemed grateful. I think I was the only one who applied. Ma didn't like it, and Pa said I couldn't do it, but when I told him I'd kick in part of what I made to the household budget, he hesitated, and I could tell by the look on Ma's face that I'd won. Pa was doing okay at the plant, but they were saying there might be another round of layoffs, and that had Ma worried. If you ever saw the look on Pa's face when Ma acted worried or scared and saw the look Ma had then, you'd know I'd won too. So I sat with the bodies. I never really understood why they needed someone to do that, but Mr. Marbury, who was the grandson of the man who had started the business in the first place, said that they had to guard against anyone disturbing the bodies. He said it was a matter of law. I didn't know how anyone could disturb a dead person, and I didn't know how I was supposed to stop anyone who did. But Mr. Marbury said they had hired girls before and never had any problems. He said, again, it was a matter of law, and even if there wasn't much chance of anything happening, they had to have someone there. My cousin Marcy used to say that Mr. Marbury was the ugliest man she'd ever seen, and he gave her the creeps. He was ugly, all right, but he had a steady voice. He talked to me like I was just someone who was working for him and not like I was a kid. He was very matter-of-fact about everything, and I liked that. He even shook my hand when I accepted the job. The late hours were kind of a struggle at first, but Ma said it was okay for me to sleep in since I was working late, and once I started doing that, it was fine. I knew there were a lot more bodies down in the basement when they got them ready to be buried, but I just had to be there in the main area where they kept the bodies after they'd been prepared, but before the funerals. I got to sit behind the desk in the main room like I was running the place. From there, I could see into the smaller rooms where they kept the individual caskets. The main room was fancy, but very serious, with paintings that blended right into the walls. The smaller rooms were plain, with maybe only some flowers on a table. Best of all, the whole place was air-conditioned, which wasn't common back then, but they needed to keep it all cool for obvious reasons. And honestly, I didn't mind the bodies. The caskets were closed, except when the families were viewing during regular hours. So from where I sat, all you saw were these long, polished boxes through the doors, and unless you went in and took a good look, they could have been anything, really. Of course, I did go into each room and check on things a couple of times a night. That's what they were paying me for, after all. And for the first week or so that I was there, every once in a while, I'd open up one of the caskets and take a look at the body inside. Maybe I shouldn't have, but nobody specifically told me not to, and I was supposed to be making sure the bodies weren't disturbed, right? Sure enough, there they all were in their caskets, but now they just looked like mannequins lying there with no expression. That was true even when every once in a while there was someone I had known, like Mrs. Nielsen, who had taught me and both my parents 4th grade, and Johnny Martin, who got killed in a wreck. Johnny was one of those kids who was mean to you until he decided to be mean to someone else, and I never liked him. Of course, that didn't mean I wanted him dead. The mortician had sure done a good job. You couldn't tell that anything had happened. But I have to admit that after the first week, I seldom looked inside the coffins. I poked my head into the rooms once or twice each night just to make sure. Otherwise, I just sat there behind the desk in this great swivel chair and read, mostly my library copy of Gone with the Wind. My cousin Kathleen claimed to have read the whole thing in a single day, starting first thing that morning and finishing after midnight. I don't doubt she did, but I can't read that fast, and even if I did, I couldn't very well take a whole day to do nothing but lie around and read a book. My father's not rich. So I sat there guarding the bodies against being disturbed. I read my book, and when I wasn't reading, I was planning the life that Billy and I were going to have together once he realized that Alice wasn't the one for him. Even my parents talked about how sensible and down-to-earth Alice was, and how that was the sort of girl Billy needed. Maybe they were right about what Billy needed, but not about who. It was quiet and cool there in the main room, and let's face it, I didn't have to do anything. Really, it was the best job I ever had. And then one night after I finished a chapter, I was resting my eyes and thinking how basically I really liked Scarlett, although I didn't see why she had to be so dramatic about everything. and I heard a noise. I opened my eyes and looked around. Nothing. Then I heard the noise again. Second room to the left. I got up and went into the room, taking my copy of Gone with the Wind in case I needed a weapon. It was certainly heavy enough. It was quiet, and then I heard the noise again. A scratching sound coming from inside the coffin. When I first heard the noise, I have to admit I was a little scared, but now that I was in the room with the noise coming from the casket, I was just numb. I didn't know what to think or do. I wasn't even aware of moving, but I found myself beside the casket, leaning down with my ear practically on the wood. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I put my book down on the floor and opened up the top half of the casket. There was an old man inside I didn't know. The scratching had stopped, but now there was a different sound. It was coming from the man's head. I looked down and realized his mouth was moving without opening. I guess they had to sew it shut or glue it or do something to keep it from falling open. Then he sat up. The casket was still closed below his waist, but there was room for him to sit up and get his arms free. He reached up and pulled at his face with both hands, and there was a sound not much louder than pulling off a Band-Aid. And his mouth opened, and he said softly but perfectly clearly, "See that my grave is kept clean." And then he lay back down and didn't say anything else. I stood there and waited. I don't know how much time passed, but he didn't sit back up, and he didn't say anything else. So I closed the casket, picked up my book, and went back to my desk. I tried to read some more, but I couldn't concentrate. I just sat there the rest of the evening and tried to decide what to do. To be honest, I didn't worry so much about the body sitting up or even talking. I'd never taken a drink of liquor in my life. Still haven't. And I knew what had happened. And there was that summer when we all read Frankenstein and Dracula and went to see that other Bela Lugosi movie about the zombies, so it wasn't like this was something I'd never heard of. What I couldn't figure out was why he said what he said. Like, I'm supposed to tend to his grave? Maybe he thought I had a different job here, or maybe he didn't realize I was there at all. Maybe he was just hoping someone was. I didn't read any more that evening. I just sat there and waited for another noise. But there wasn't one, and when my time was up, I got up and went home and didn't say a word to anyone. It never happened again, which was just as well. If there had been more bodies sitting up and talking, I might have had to tell someone, and if I didn't, I might have had to quit my job, and neither one of those was something I wanted to do. Once Ma and Pa were used to me being there with the bodies, they would have been disappointed if I quit a perfectly good job. And if anyone was going to get Billy away from sensible Alice, it probably wouldn't be a girl dead people talk to. So I didn't tell anyone, and like I said, it never happened again. When the summer was over, I went back to school, and by the end of the senior year, sure enough, Billy saw the light about old Alice and started going steady with me. We got married, and here we are. Everything's fine. I don't think much about what happened, but sometimes I have these dreams, and when I wake up, it's hard to get back to sleep. When that happens, I look over at Billy, and I'm so happy he's lying right there beside me. If Billy dies before I do, and he wants to sit up and pull his dead mouth open and start talking, he can just forget about it. He can just lie right back down. That story is going to be in an anthology called, I believe it's going to be called Hauntings. It's from a small Canadian press called Double Dragon Press. There's a long story about how it comes in there, having to do with my having a meeting with the editor, a problem about my submitting a reprint story, and the editor still wanting me to send something. And so when I sent this original story, she said, "Oh, sure, that will be fine." I think that's coming out later this year. Road Dead is under submission. The poems are variously under submission in places. I'll also add that See That My Grave Is Kept Clean is, that is a job that one of my wife's cousins actually had back in the day, and that is my representation of her voice. When I put it through my writer's workshop, everybody was convinced it was a Southern Gothic story. I said, no, this takes place in Lynn, Massachusetts. For what that's worth. I got a 5-minute sign about 3 minutes ago, so I guess very quickly, anybody has any questions?
Well, as soon as you mentioned that she heard noises in the other room, my first thought was, oh, it's the dead people yakking on their cell phones again.
Probably. Okay. But, all right, well, thank you all very much.